Breaking news coming in from the Middle East. Hamas top leadership have been attacked. The attack took place in Doha, Qatar. The Hamas team was engaged in negotiations with other officials in the Qatari capital moments after the news of explosion in Doha came. The Israeli military announced that it has carried out attacks targeting Hamas leadership. In a statement, the IDF says that prior to the strike, steps were taken to minimize harm to uninvolved civilians, including the use of precision weaponry and additional intelligence information. Now, the IDF statement does not explicitly mention Qatar, but comes following reports of large explosions in Doha, where Hamas's top leadership resides. Israeli officials say that the U.S. was notified before Hamas's leaders were struck. Now Qatar says this attack is a flagrant violation to all international law. If you're just joining us, we are breaking news for you that Israel carries out attack against Hamas leadership in Qatar. This is to an Israeli source. Israel carried out this attack against Hamas leadership in Doha. Media reports say that Israel has confirmed that it has been carried out in Doha, Qatar, after an explosion was heard in the Qatari capital. Now, this source, speaking to some media outlets here in the United States, did not say who was targeted, but Hamas leaders have used the Qatari capital as a headquarters outside of Gaza City for years. We're reporting and learning that shortly after the explosion, the Israeli Defense Force, the IDF, issued a statement that it had targeted, quote unquote, senior leadership of Hamas with a precise strike in a joint operation with Shin Bet security agency, that is. Now, we're also hearing from Qatar. Qatar strongly condemns the Israeli strike on Hamas leaders in Doha, calling it cowardly, saying that the strikes targeted residential buildings housing several members of the political bureau of Hamas. This is according to Foreign Ministry spokesman Majd al-Ansari. Says that a criminal assault constitutes a blatant violation of all international laws and norms and poses a serious threat to the security and safety of Qataris and residents in Qatar. That is a quote from the Foreign Ministry spokesman Majd al-Ansari. This is, of course, the political bureau of Hamas. Ansari adds that Qatar will not tolerate this reckless Israel behavior and the ongoing disruption of regional security, nor any act that targets its security and sovereignty. He says, this Qatari official, that Qatar is investigating at the highest level. Now, more news is coming in as well. We're getting more reaction. Iran condemns this, saying that this is a gross violation, referring to Israel's targeting of Hamas officials. Of course, the news that we have been breaking for you. If you're just joining us, this is breaking news. Israel has carried out attack against Hamas leadership in Qatar. This is according to Israeli sources. Now, we don't know who this target is, but we do now know that it is a senior Hamas official. Qatar has been very quick to react, strongly, of course, condemning these strikes on Hamas leaders in Doha, calling it cowardly. Israel finance minister says now that it was the right decision to target Hamas leaders. Of course, you do know this attack comes just shortly after Israel was attacked recently in the heart of the country. We have breaking news coming in for you. It is about the Israeli attack against Hamas leadership in Qatar. I'd like to read you some reactions. First of all, Qatar has strongly condemned the Israeli strike on Hamas leaders. It has called it cowardly, saying the strikes, quote, targeted residential buildings housing several members of the political bureau of Hamas. This is according to Qatar's foreign ministry spokesman, Majd al-Ansari. He continues by noting that criminal assault constitutes a blatant violation of all international laws and norms and poses a serious threat to the security and safety of Qataris and residents in Qatar. Now, this is despite the fact that the IDF has issued a statement saying that it was a precision strike. No civilians have been killed. Of course, we're waiting to verify that. As soon as we have more information, we are going to bring it to you. But more news is coming in as well. Some reaction. Iran has immediately condemned this attack, saying it's a gross violation. Of course, referring to the news that we're breaking for you, Israel's targeting of Hamas officials. Israel's finance minister has replied, saying that it was the right decision to target Hamas leaders. The Israeli military is also talking. It targeted senior Hamas leaders after an AFP journalist in Doha reported explosions in the Qatari capital, where the Palestinian group's political bureau is based. Now, if you're just joining us, we have this breaking news coming in from the Middle East. Doha, Qatar specifically, a Hamas leadership official or leadership officials, we're waiting to see how many senior officials have been attacked. The attack took place in Doha, as I mentioned, and the Hamas team was engaged in negotiations with other officials in the Qatari capital of Doha. Okay. We have a guest now from Ankara, Turkey. He is a non-residential fellow at the Atlantic Council, Omer Oziklikchik. Omer, I am so sorry if I didn't pronounce your last name correctly. Can you tell us what this means right now as we're breaking this news?
No worries about the surname. So what this means is, first of all, that Israel is not interested in negotiation. So Israel is going ahead with its plan to occupy the Gaza Strip, and this is a blatant violation of any form of international norms, because Qatar has been giving assurances from the United States of America, from Israel for years, to host the Hamas leadership so that there is a channel for negotiations. And by attacking Hamas figures who were part of the negotiation team in the country that is mediating, what Israel is doing is basically eliminating any further chances, hopes for negotiations. So who will from now on be willing to host Hamas figures for negotiations if Qatar is being struck by Israeli fighter jets? So this is a blatant violation of the Qatari sovereignty. This is a blatant violation of international norms and regulations. And this is actually quite worrying, because from now on, what will happen is that with the killing of these Hamas officials, who will continue to speak for the Hamas movement? So who will speak for them with the United States of America? As we know, there were negotiations between the US and the Hamas movement. And who will make an agreement with them if there is a need for an agreement? There are still hostages that Israel wants out. There's the issue of the humanitarian situation in Gaza. And what this basically means is that figures in the Israeli government, like Smotrich, like Ben-Gvir, who advocated for much more radical positions, are now basically the decision makers in the Israeli government. And that Israel has decided to end any trajectory towards negotiations and political resolutions, and to occupy the Gaza Strip and to assert its own dominance in the Gaza Strip against the role of Qatar, against the hopes of the Arab states. And this action will ultimately alienate the potential for regional peace, as well as the Arab states, seeing that Qatar has been attacked, despite the assurances, will take a further stance away from Israel and will not pursue the path of normalization with Israel anymore. And this will push the region further into fragility and instability.
And do you see the escalation now spiraling further and even spinning out of Gaza, considering the fact that it appears that the battlefield has been extended to somewhere like Doha, Qatar, where negotiations were taking place?
I mean, I do not expect that the war per se would be expanded, but what happened is that now everyone knows that Israel can attack anyone despite US assurances. So this is a show that it shows for every regional state, the Gulf states especially, who are dependent on US security guarantees, that they cannot count on the US to protect them and their sovereignty if it doesn't go align with the Israeli strategy. So if it's on one side, the Israeli strategy to kill Hamas figures or to do something else, these Arab states, they now know and have seen that the US will not be there to protect them and prevent Israel from attacking their sovereignty and their territory. And furthermore, this also signals something more troubling. We also know that there are Hamas officials in Egypt. So will Israel also target eventually Egypt and the Hamas figures inside Egypt who were also part of the negotiations? And secondly, under an agreement signed years ago between Israel and Hamas, some Hamas figures were evacuated from the Gaza to Turkey. So will Israel eventually try to attack Hamas figures inside Turkey as well? So everyone is now quite worried about the unlimited and apparently unending potential of Israel to do whatever it wants, wherever it wants, and with American blessings and American support. Because we know as of now that the Israeli side has informed the United States of America before its attack and got an American green light. Because in Doha, we have the biggest US military base in the region and maybe overseas of the United States of America. And the US has all of these capable systems to know the Israelis are going to attack before the Israelis are going to attack. And they could prevent this if they wanted to. But apparently they did decide not to protect Qatar's sovereignty as they initially signed under the agreement they signed with Qatar, but to protect this Israeli strategy. So this is quite disturbing for the regional states and quite worrying for any other state in the region except for Israel.
We have more breaking news coming in. The U.S. Embassy in Qatar now asks citizens to shelter in place. Omar, you were talking about the United States and how it appears that Israel did indeed inform the United States of this attack prior. Where does this leave U.S. credibility with its foreknowledge of this attack, considering the fact that it was playing as a mediator in the region? What happens now? And then, of course, if you have a reaction to this story about the shelter in place, the U.S. Embassy in Qatar.
Yeah, look, first of all, if the Israelis and the Americans decided that they don't want to negotiate with Hamas anymore, they could simply ask Qatar that the security guarantees that they have given to Qatar ended, and they could ask Qatar to kick out Hamas figures out of the country. This was something doable, and this was the norm that has to be done, because when Qatar began to host these Hamas figures, it did not so because it wanted to do it by itself. This was a request from the Americans at that time, and the Americans, as well as the Israelis indirectly, gave Qatar assurances that there will be no attack against Qatar, and this will have no negative impact on Qatar. Now we see these assurances are gone. So what was the necessary thing that Israel had to kill there? I mean, if they don't want to negotiate, these Hamas officials could be kicked out of Qatar, and the Israeli side and American side could clearly articulate to Qatar, we ended. We don't want to speak with Hamas, kick them out. And they could kill these Hamas figures somewhere else. As we know, they have done so, for instance, in Iran. When Hamas figures were killed in Iran, this was something different because there were no American assurances, no Israeli acceptance, and no international agreement on this. And in Qatar, the situation is very different, as I elaborated. And this goes beyond the Hamas issue, because Qatar is not only a mediator in terms of Hamas. Qatar was the mediator in terms of Taliban. Qatar is a mediator in many different conflict areas. And Qatar has been doing these kind of mediation with US assurances. So if there's a new conflict in the region or in somewhere else in the world, will Qatar mediate anymore?
Right. That's a very valid point. Omar, thank you so much for joining us on WION during this breaking news. If you're just joining us, we have some reactions before I say goodbye to you. Israel's far-right finance minister Bezalel Smotrich praised the targeting of Hamas leaders after Qatar said an Israeli strike targeted residential buildings housing members of the Palestinian militant group in Doha. He said terrorists have no immunity and will never have immunity. That is part of his statement on X. Of course, this is a developing story. It's a big story. We're going to bring you all the latest here on WION.
For all the latest news, download the WION app and subscribe to our YouTube channel.